I've never eaten a chicken biscuits before. It wasn't too bad.
All right, so we're recording this. Today's session is going to be it's called A Whole New and Confusing World of Short-Term Rental Policies. The information is actually fairly short, so we're hopefully we'll be in and out of this meeting pretty quickly. The first thing is this particular program was put on by Scott Riedenbach of Riedenbach and Associates out of Wayne, Pennsylvania. Come on in and have a seat. He actually presented this at the CAI trade show, not trade show, convention, excuse me. It was not too bad. He was an attorney, so there's some legalese stuff in here that we have to kind of deal with. The first thing is, what is a short-term rental?
It's under 6 months, and it is usually used for vacation type.
Okay.
That's it.
Anybody else?
They're not a contract in place.
A short-term rental is actually what your community defines it as. Okay? Some of them say it cannot be anything less than 30 days. Some say 6 months. Some say a year. It depends on what your association defines it as. Yeah, you can write on this, your copy. One of the things to remember is part of what came up with this, there was a case here in Texas. It was the TAR case, T-A-R case. And what happened was the association was hanging all of their stuff about STRs, short-term rentals, on the fact that their docs stated that the homes could only be used for residential purposes. Since this was obviously being ran as a business, the association's like, we're not allowing this to happen. We're not going to be pushing this thing forward, and you guys are in violation, so stop it. They take it through the court system, and the courts decided, the Texas Supreme Court decided, that because the base uses of the house was still residential, even if it was for 1 day, it's still a residential use. Okay? So that clause is not strong enough to help everybody stand on. Okay? So if you have somebody in your association says, well, our docs say you can only do residential things in the house. That is true. That's what your docs state. The Supreme Court says that short-term rentals are residential. I'm not on the Supreme Court, so I cannot make a reference on that, okay? But what happens is people will buy these homes nowadays to go in for the specific purpose of doing short-term rentals. Why would someone do that?
It's an investment.
It's absolutely an investment. What are some other pluses that come out of this? We had some properties that were very high end, right? I mean, the homes were $1.2 million, $1.4 million, and they were in a very highly desirable area. And the folks that lived there traveled a lot. Why not have your house making some money while you're traveling?
Mm-hmm. A lot of people can pay their mortgages just out of a couple of weekends.
Absolutely. When you're getting, on a nice house in a nice area, when you're getting $2,000 a day, you can kind of cover up a mortgage real fast. Okay? Even on a short term, we had one all the way out in Parker County. They were still getting it for $200 a day for the house. It's better than you're going to get for a hotel. You're going to pay, a nice hotel room is going to be $200 a day. But here you get the whole house for $200. Well, if you do that, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's $600 for a weekend. In 2 weeks, you've covered your principal and interest payment. So a lot of folks are actually buying these houses for that because weeks 3 and 4 are profit. Okay. Matter of fact, that's one of the pictures they've got on here is there's an Airbnb in Miami where they have actually gone in and decorated it to look like Seinfeld's house. From the movie, from the show. There's another one where they've decorated it to look like Monica and Rachel's apartment in Friends. So you can get that whole experience. But these things range in all different areas. Stuff like this, entire houses. There's a big push now like tiny homes where you can go out onto a piece of property and there's a tiny home, you can stay in that. There's even a friend of ours did an Airbnb short-term rental in a teepee. The people had these teepees set up on their property. It was camping, but not camping, right? It was they had nice beds, and it was the look and feel of being in a teepee, but it was still a short-term rental. Okay, how does all of that affect our associations?
Well, we get a lot of complaints, noise complaints,
Okay.
Because of,
parking complaints.
Okay, so are Airbnbs good or bad? When I say Airbnb, I'm talking about short-term rentals. Let me just rephrase that.
it
Short-term
depends on the
rentals.
situation.
Okay. It is your viewpoint. It is your perspective, right? The investor is loving the money. The guy down the street probably doesn't care because he's not seeing anything. The guy right next door is not very happy. And then the board and the management company are right in the middle trying to make everybody happy and seeing if they can make it all come together. Okay? So it's kind of a tough scenario when you look at it. A few things about short-term rentals in the United States. As of 2021, there are approximately 20 million rental properties in the United States.
Wow.
That's rental properties, okay? Standard rentals. As of also 2021, there was 1.6 or 1.06 million short-term rentals. That's a lot. I mean, that's literally a fifth of all rentals were being done on a short-term basis. This is something that we as an association management company have to kind of get our head around. In 2022, the demand for short-term rentals was up 18.2% year over year. So people are actually getting to the point of, it's really kind of interesting, as technology changes, as age groups tend to move out into doing other things and start spending money and things like that, they take some of these things that they're used to seeing with them. A millennial doesn't think a lot about going and getting a taxi. What do they get?
Uber.
An Uber, right? Or a Lyft, right? And so a millennial or someone in that age grouping probably would not think the first thing is let's go find a hotel room. Their first thing is going to be let's find an STR. Okay? But STRs are not new. We're just having to deal with them now, right? So we got to remember, and this is part of from a management perspective, where we are managing properties for multiple age groups. A baby boomer person is just like, what do you mean someone's renting a house for a day? That's ridiculous, right? Because it's just not within the confines of what they understand. And what do you mean it's not resident? It's not business. They're running a business. They're getting paid for people to be there, but that's not what the law says. So we have to walk that line, and we have to do a lot of explanations. That's the reason why we're doing this particular class, is so you've got information as you're talking with these varying age groups to be able to address their concerns. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why you're in here on this, honestly, is somebody's going to cost. Why am I paying my dues of this much money to have somebody else just in here? I don't even know them. Mm-hmm. It is a big deal.
Well, and a lot of times before a property sells, we get calls about, does this association allow them?
That's right.
And she has to deal with explaining why someone has a $500 fine for having an STR.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so we're going to get into some of the fine things shortly. When it comes to the top rental companies, the top four are Airbnb, VRBO, Bookings.com, and Expedia. I was surprised to find that was it Airbnb?
Yeah.
VRBO actually was bought out by Expedia.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the same company now. So they've got positions number 2 and 4, and they're the same company. So that puts them right up at the top of things. But you just don't know what types of companies you're dealing with. So you have to work through that. Regulating of short-term rentals. The county municipal governments are starting to take primary responsibility for regulating the short-term rentals. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for the HOA?
Depends on the HOA.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It really can be a good thing in that the city is not going to be doing the enforcement if the city has the means to do the enforcement. If not, they may be looking to the association to handle those things on a more localized level.
But it also takes the responsibility of passing the rule off of the association.
That's right, that's right. So there was an article that I think I shared with everybody except for maybe you and that was just recently done about what the varying communities in the Metroplex are actually doing for short-term rentals. And they had a city-by-city blip of what they're all doing. Ashley and I were talking about it the other day. Plano is actually banned them.
I
in the
was
city.
fixing to say, I thought
Yeah.
I remember seeing.
Just for 1 year.
And you see, it's really interesting because things will change. It will ebb and flow. They'll try it for a year and see how it goes. If it goes well, then they may do it for another year. We actually, years ago, we stayed in what was technically a short-term rental. It was a house on the
I've done it a
beach
couple of times.
in La Jolla, California. The city of La Jolla is on the beach. They en masse came through
Yeah.
and shut everybody down. Just no more in our city because they didn't like the traffic. They didn't like the things. But the city took care of that, so an association wouldn't have to. Okay, the city of Dallas is primarily looking at the hotel motel tax. You know, they're looking at us. How can we get more money? We need to know, and this is where it gets to be our job. We need to know what cities are doing what for the properties that we manage. You don't want to go into Richardson and say, well, this is what the city of Dallas is doing, because Richardson may or may not be doing that. Okay? You don't want to go into Capel and say, well, this is what Irving's doing, because again, they may not be doing the same thing.
Well, you
So
also don't
we've
wanna,
got to know what's required in each individual city.
well, you also don't wanna go to a board meeting and have your board tell you what that city is doing.
It's always best for us to be the smartest person in the room. Okay, and I hate to say it that way, but there are times when we need to know more about what's going on than they do. They are living in the city, so they're going to get some of that information that we're just not going to have, and that's okay. We just got to make sure that we take that to heart. Okay. Short-term rentals, and what do you do in a short-term rental for your community? There's really 3 options, right? You can encourage them, you can ban them, or you can regulate them. The problem with the encouragement side of it is people are like, well, we can encourage them, but only in this little area. The guy was talking about, he saw that where you get them all in one place, and therefore they only bother that group of people, right? They're only bothering each other basically, and the guys that don't want the people coming and going right next door to them is fine. But what happens when this guy wants to rent his house out, and he's not over here? He can't physically move the house. So you end up regulating yourself into a problem, basically.
Right.
So don't let your boards do knee-jerk reactions. Does that make sense?
Wouldn't that also be considered steering?
That's exactly what
That's
one of the
what
ladies
some of the ladies
in the thing said. And for those of you who don't have any licensing stuff, steering is a real estate term where you are guiding people for their purchases into certain areas, usually based off of race, religion, creed, nationality.
Familial status.
Familial status. Oh yeah, you'll love this part of the property because
There's lots of
everybody that's over here has lots of kids and dogs.
So it's kind of like profiling,
It's exactly like that.
But it comes off much nicer than like the stereotype profiling, but it's still against
Right.
the rules.
Yeah.
But it's still the same thing.
So steering is very bad, and so that's exactly what that would end up being.
Well, but and the lady that was the example that they were giving was new construction too, and saying that, like, this end of the community is going to be where our short-term rentals are allowed. And so it kind of was in like a gray area of like, well, if it's in the docks, that kind of like the townhomes, the duplexes, like these are the ones you're allowed to rent out. But
Well, and it's like the property we had up in Sanger that we used to have. They had a policy about leasing that you could lease your home. You just could not put up a sign unless it was an attached home of some kind. You were not allowed to advertise the facility for lease via signage. So they had a separate set of rules for those, and it was a little questionable. So the trick is, do you try to ban the short-term rentals? What you end up with is policies, procedures, the law. You have all these things that are coming in at you at all different places. Who do you think is qualified to pull the trigger on any kind of changes in your association's operations on this? Get your attorney involved. Absolutely. And that is the nuts and bolts of where a bunch of this training ended up is you need to have legal counsel involved. The last thing you want to do is have someone say, oh, well, this is what we did at my place down in Galveston.
Here's a copy of the.
Here's what we did. Can't we just copy this and change the name? their docks are different. I was reading a set of docs just last night for our community, and they looked an awful lot like one of our other properties. That's probably the worst thought that could go through my head, because now I stop reading, because it looks like those. They could be different. They can have different phrases. They can have a different.
Clauses or different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got to always remember the docs say what the docs say, and you need legal counsel. Okay. One of the things that came out of this is this guy talked about was that changing the policies and procedures via a policy and procedure is messy, because it doesn't carry the full weight of the docs. Do y'all remember the hierarchy of documents?
Mm-hmm.
What are they, Jenna?
Oh, don't put me on the spot.
And I'm asking you because you're closest to the thing, so you can get it
I know,
recorded. Speak loudly. The highest three in an association are
well, the federal.
In the association.
in the association.
Articles of incorporation.
Okay,
Bylaws and declarations.
bylaws and declarations. Okay, that's the hierarchy of docs. Those by design are very difficult to change, because that's kind of the contractual agreement that everybody did when they bought the property. That is also where, if you're going to do it right, you need to do an amendment to which one, if you're going to address short-term rentals.
Declaration?
Yes, the declaration. Remember, in the hierarchy, the articles or certificate of formation actually establish the entity. It creates the legal entity. The bylaws say, how are we going to run this entity administratively? Meetings and notices and all of that stuff. And then the declaration says, how are we going to run this association physically, the property, the dues, how much, when is it due, when does it come in late, all of that stuff. So there are three very succinctly different but very important documents. And they do take, and usually the declaration will state that, or the both of them will state, if there's ever a conflict between the bylaws or the declaration overrides.
Yeah, in the M100 class, it's got articles of incorporation or certificate of formation.
Yep.
And then it's got declaration, and then it's got bylaws.
Yep. So those run in those things in that kind of scenario. Then you add in rules, regulations, policies, and procedures, which most of the boards, if they have the authority in the bylaws, they can establish their own rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. I would again have a legal counsel write those up and look at how those come into play for that property, making sure they have the authority to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Okay.
you have the problem of the next board that comes in can change anything they.
Which is what the next slide is talking about, is that you have, if you don't get things done in the declaration, then you have a constant preference one way or another, and things are constantly going to be changing or against each other.
Yeah, imagine a lake, a community on the lake, and you've got 5 people that are renting their stuff out with STRs, and the board that's living there now doesn't like STRs, so they pass a rule that says no STRs. Well, then at the next election, they just get 3 out of the 5 voted off, right? They bring in 3 guys that the STR people like, and they undo the rule. Who can live that way? You know, it's like raising kids. You have to be consistent with the rules. You can't be changing them back and forth, back and forth. It's almost like, going and saying that you're going to spend the weekend with this parent or the weekend with that parent. You got different sets of rules for each place. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so definitely want to get it into the declaration or the bylaws, because they are designed to be difficult to change. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You can do it through a policy or a procedure just to get it operating, but you really need to push it down into the declaration.
Are you going to talk about this? 'Cause I thought this was interesting. He was talking about when communities do fully embrace short-term rentals.
Yeah.
So there was one guy that you had
Speak
specifically.
loudly so they can hear you.
There's one guy that John had specifically talked to that I think it was a high-rise
Yeah,
community.
it was a 4,400. It was a community with homes on Hilton Head Island in South Carolina.
Oh yeah, I can
They
see
had
that.
4,400 and he's 4,250 homes.
And I think we're thinking of a different one.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the one that he just mentioned, they actually passed a change to their declaration with 77% of the
77%.
community to completely ban them, because they were all just over the whole short-term rental thing. So that just put an immediate stop to it. I was talking about the other guy that
Who created the fine system?
they created a fine system where they've created tons of revenue for their community by embracing the short-term rentals, but you have to register your short-term rental.
And that's where they're getting their money is they get the registration fee,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't register it, then they get a fine you. They fine you for not registering, not for having the STR, but for not registering the STR.
So they're actually regulating, they're allowing it,
Yes.
but regulating
and
every
every
portion of it.
so every STR that they have, every time they throw a posting out, for every day that it runs, it's $100.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
said
If
that
they haven't registered.
Right? No. That's their registration fee. You register it, it's $100 for
But that's
every.
still just a minimal amount
It's,
of what they're
and
making.
that's their point. That's exactly their
Yeah.
point. But through this particular property had gained enough money that they didn't have to special assess, and they completely redid all of their golf course, the greens on the
Wow.
golf course. They redid the bunkers and never had to do a special assessment because they embraced the STRs.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings in more revenue
Yeah.
because then they've got
So-
better
I think
amenities.
he
Yeah.
said they made like an average like $60,000 a year
Oh yeah.
just from this registration fee and these fines. And they even had like a person whose entire job was to stock websites,
They-
Facebook, Craigslist,
Mhm.
Marketplace.
So I
VRBO.
mentioned to him that you can actually, there are actually companies that will stock them for you. But he literally hired a person to sit there and just scour over all the rental sites
That's cool.
looking for their people.
so they can find people.
But that, I mean, that, like,
But it's a different.
that's
it's a
brilliant,
different-
actually.
But it's a different difference from like what most people assume, especially what's going on right now. Is like, oh, we need to ban them, but when you embrace them, there's opportunities for.
But do they also,
So
Revenue
the
too.
do they
question really,
regulate the usage of them? Because, I mean, that's the biggest issue that most associations have.
That's
They-
what you
is
have to
the
register.
usage
that's
of
why
them.
they have to be registered, because
Okay.
that, hey, since here's your $500 fine, because we just had your tenant or your person at your STR fired off fireworks, so that's absolutely prohibited.
Okay.
So here's your $500 fine, non-negotiable.
So basically, it's almost like a whole new declaration.
It's
For short-term
it's actually a
rentals.
whole new division of the management company.
Okay.
Because this guy is doing nothing but monitoring STRs. They hired someone to do nothing but STRs.
Wow.
Think about that. That's a pretty heavy duty deal. Now, from the management company perspective, how are they getting paid for that? Well, this was an on-site guy, so it was no big deal. But if you're a portfolio management company, how many portfolio management companies have people on staff that's their job? So you have to find a company to help you, or whatever. You charge for it, like we do collection fees. Maybe you would charge for that, or our social media thing. So you would have to put that into play.
But it's
So-
an interesting
But
twist
the-
opposite
yeah,
of what most
Mhm.
people were doing.
take on it goes right back to the concept we started with. You have to know what your associations want you to do. Some associations may be okay with it. We've got some associations that are out by the lake. They want it to be okay that your boat can be at your property 3 out of 7 days of the week that aren't weekends. Right? Well, that means that's 5 out of 7 days you can have a boat where the docs say no boats. So you got to look at that. Where is the association? And like this one guy was talking about at Hilton Head, sometimes the community will change. Because we've always done it that way should never be a thing we say.
Mhm.
Okay. Why do we do collections this way? It's the way we've always done it. No, we should never say that. Why do we do collections this way? Because it's what the docs require. Well, can we change that? Yes, it can be changed. It's not easy, but it can be changed. Whatever those things might be. Because as communities change, so some of their desires. If you've got a group coming in a brand new build, and all the declarant's trying to do is sell houses, right? He may sell to anybody with a pulse, right?
And promise them anything that.
And promise them anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things he said. They'll tell them anything they want just to get the sale done. Yeah, short-term rentals, no big deal, come on in. Well, that may be fine while the declarant's in control, but then when you transition, what's that transition board gonna want?
Mhm.
What happens 15 years later when the people that bought them initially as weekend houses are now living there full time? Does that change the way they look at things? What happens when you spend $3 million redoing your common hallways in all of the areas, and you don't want people walking up and down and tearing them up because they're using it like a hotel? Because we all know, and it's just I'm not putting people down, but people don't take care of stuff as well as if they're borrowing it than if they own it. It's just human nature. We get to be the ones that have to monitor all of that. Okay, so the short-term rental thing really boils down to, one, in Texas, it is not considered a business. It is considered residential use of a property. Okay, I am not gonna go through all the legalese, back here in the back, reading through all these case laws and stuff. You can do that yourself. But the takeaways on this is that short-term rentals are not gonna go away anytime soon. Okay, we need to be cognizant of what the properties want, what the individual boards want. And quite honestly, we may have to walk that line, because you may have a board that says no STRs, and you may have a community going, we love STRs, but the board that got elected is going to push the agenda of not having it. Where are we at this point? We are literally between the board and the association. Our job is to take care of the association under the direction of the board. That's tough. Okay, so we have to be very attentive to what's going on around us. We have to know what the associations want. We have to know what the cities are requiring and allowing, and we need to make sure that we have that contact information. If the city is going to try to ban those, that we know how to reach out to who that needs to be. And you need to be readily available to go to legal counsel. If they really want to make a change, you need to get it in the declaration. You can do it by a policy, but you need to get it in the declaration so it's solid. Okay?
I never thought about a short-term rental being a profit center.
I hadn't either, but I mean, it makes sense.
If it can be a profit center for the investor, why could it not be a profit center for the association?
It definitely would.
If you're willing to deal with the headaches. I used to work with a guy that his policy was always, I don't like certain types it was a commercial deal. I don't like certain types of tenants. At a certain price point, I'll deal with them. That was his policy.
Well, and too, if an association is inclined to be accepting of short-term, and it's all, with the legalities and the governmental, then us knowing the, benefits of having a very structured thing would be very beneficial for them.
It could be really, really hard to run that on an individual home.
Right.
Because enforcement would be horrendous. But like this particular one, it was a high rise, so they were basically almost checking in like a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really easy to monitor. The few people that didn't were the reason that they had.
Well, like
The
a
person
property
that's
on the
scouring
lake
it.
that's condos.
Mm-hmm.
A very good possibility that could be something that could be done.
All right. So, any questions? Okay. Well, this will be the end of our first training session. So that somebody will push the stop button up there, the square one, right there.